Have you ever wondered what it feels like to watch your entire world crumble in a single moment? To see your dreams turn to dust, your family torn apart by jealousy so fierce it drives brothers to contemplate murder? Tonight, I want to tell you about a young man who experienced exactly that, and how the very betrayal meant to destroy him became the pathway to saving nations. This is the story of Joseph, a story that begins in the rolling hills of Canaan with a father's foolish favoritism, descends into the darkness of an Egyptian prison, and rises to the throne room of Pharaoh himself. It's a story about dreams, both the kind that visit us in sleep and the kind that drive us through our waking hours. It's about the mystery of suffering, the power of forgiveness, and the way God can weave even our greatest tragedies into his greatest triumphs. Picture, if you will, an old man named Jacob, weathered by years of wandering, his heart heavy with the weight of his own complicated past. He has 12 sons, but there is one, the child of his beloved Rachel, born in his old age, who holds a special place in his affections. Joseph, 17 years old, with eyes that seem to hold starlight and a spirit that burns bright with the fire of divine purpose. But love, when it shows favoritism, becomes a poison that seeps into the very foundation of a family. Jacob makes for Joseph a coat, not just any coat, but a garment of many colors, rich and beautiful, the kind worn by those destined for leadership. Every thread was woven with parental love, but also with the seeds of sibling resentment. When Joseph wore that coat, it wasn't just fabric draped across his shoulders. It was a declaration that screamed to his older brothers. He is the chosen one. He is the beloved. You are not. And if the coat wasn't enough to kindle their hatred, Joseph's dreams certainly were. Picture him, this young man, rushing to his brothers with the innocent excitement of youth, his heart bursting with visions that had visited him in the night. "Listen to this dream I had," he says, his voice bright with wonder. "We were binding sheaves in the field, and suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around and bowed down to it." The silence that follows is thick with tension. His brothers' faces darken like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. "Do you intend to reign over us?" they demand. "Will you actually rule us?" And with each word, their hatred grows deeper, more bitter, more dangerous. But Joseph isn't finished. Another dream comes, even more provocative than the first. The sun, the moon, and 11 stars all bowing down to him. Even his father Jacob is troubled by this vision, rebuking his son for such grandiose dreams. Yet something in the old patriarch's heart whispers that these aren't merely the fantasies of a young man's ambitious mind. He keeps these things in his heart, pondering them like precious secrets. The brothers, however, keep something else in their hearts: hatred, jealousy, and a growing desire for revenge. The opportunity comes when Jacob sends Joseph to check on his brothers, who are pasturing their flocks in the distant fields of Dothan. Picture Joseph setting out on this journey, the coat of many colors brilliant in the morning sun, his heart light with the simple task his father has given him. He has no idea he's walking toward his destiny and what feels like his doom. When his brothers see him coming from afar, that colorful coat unmistakable on the horizon, something snaps inside them. "Here comes this dreamer," they say to one another, and in those words, you can hear years of accumulated resentment finally boiling over. "Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of the pits. We can say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams." Kill him, their own brother. The casual way they speak of murder reveals just how deeply the poison of jealousy has infected their souls. This is what favoritism can do. It doesn't just create a preferred child, it creates enemies within the very sanctuary of family. But Reuben, the eldest, his conscience pricking him even through his own jealousy, tries to save Joseph's life. "Let's not take his life," he says. "Don't shed any blood. Throw him into this cistern here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him." Reuben is planning to rescue Joseph later, to return him safely to their father. But plans, especially desperate ones born in moments of crisis, rarely unfold as we hope. When Joseph arrives, breathless from his journey, perhaps calling out greetings to his brothers, they fall upon him like wolves. They strip him of that beautiful coat, that symbol of their father's love, that source of their torment, and they throw him into an empty cistern. Imagine Joseph in that moment, as shocked in terror as his own brothers turn against him. The physical pain of being thrown into the pit, but more than that, the emotional agony of betrayal by those who should have protected him. And then, in what might be the cruelest touch of all, they sit down to eat. While their brother cries out from the depths of the pit, they calmly break bread as if nothing has happened. The casual brutality of it takes your breath away. But then they see something that changes everything, a caravan of Ishmaelite traders approaching, their camels loaded with spices, balm, and myrrh, bound for Egypt and Judah, whose name will one day be associated with the lineage of kings, suggests something that seems merciful, but may actually be more cruel than death. What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites, and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood. Sell him. Their brother becomes a commodity, a transaction. 20 shekels of silver, that's all Joseph's life is worth to them. Less than the price of a good donkey. They pull him up from the pit, and we can only imagine his relief. Perhaps he thinks they've come to their senses, that they're going to release him. Instead, they hand him over to strangers, to merchants who will carry him far from everything he's ever known, into a land of foreign gods and foreign tongues. As the caravan disappears into the distance, carrying Joseph toward an uncertain future, his brothers are left with a problem. How do they explain his absence to their father? They take that beautiful coat, that symbol of love and favoritism, and they tear it. They dip it in the blood of a goat, transforming it from a garment of honor into evidence of tragedy. When they return to Jacob, they don't even have to lie outright. They simply present the bloodied coat and ask, "We found this. Examine it to see whether it is your son's robe or not." The implication is clear, and Jacob draws the terrible conclusion they want him to reach. It is my son's robe. Some ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces. The old man's grief is devastating to witness. He tears his clothes, puts on sackcloth, and mourns for his son for many days. All his sons and daughters try to comfort him, but he refuses to be comforted. "No," he says, "I will continue to mourn until I join my son in the grave." And all the while, the very sons who are trying to comfort him are the ones who caused his anguish. But what of Joseph? As his father mourns him as dead, he is very much alive, though perhaps wishing he weren't. The journey to Egypt must have been a nightmare, bound like cargo, sold like an animal, carried further and further from home with each step of the camels. Everything familiar disappears behind him. The hills of Canaan, his father's tents, the sound of Hebrew voices, the worship of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. In Egypt, Joseph finds himself on the auction block, another slave among many in the marketplace. But even here, even in the depths of his humiliation, there's something different about him. When Potiphar, captain of Pharaoh's guard, sees him, something compels him to make the purchase. Perhaps it's Joseph's bearing, the intelligence in his eyes, or simply the mysterious workings of divine providence. And here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. You might expect Joseph to become bitter, to rage against God and man for the injustices he's suffered. Instead, we see something remarkable. Joseph prospers, not in spite of his circumstances, but somehow through them. The Lord is with Joseph, and whatever he does, the Lord makes it succeed. Potiphar notices this. How could he not? Everything Joseph touches turns to gold. Every task he's given is completed with excellence. Every responsibility he shoulders is handled with integrity and skill. Before long, Potiphar puts Joseph in charge of his entire household, and from that time on, the Lord blesses the Egyptian's household for Joseph's sake. Think about this for a moment. Here is a young man who has every reason to be angry with God. He obeyed his father, he shared his dreams honestly, and what did it get him? Betrayal, slavery, exile. Yet instead of becoming bitter, he becomes better. Instead of losing his faith, he deepens it. Instead of seeking revenge, he seeks to serve faithfully wherever God has placed him. But just when it seems that Joseph's fortunes have turned, when he's found a measure of peace and purpose in Potiphar's house, temptation arrives wearing the face of Potiphar's wife. Day after day, she pursues him with growing boldness. "Come to bed with me," she demands. But Joseph refuses, and his refusal reveals the depth of his character. "My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife," he tells her. "How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" Notice what he says. This wouldn't just be a betrayal of Potiphar's trust. It would be a sin against God. Even in Egypt, even as a slave, Joseph remains accountable to the God of his fathers. But persistent temptation can be dangerous, and Potiphar's wife grows more aggressive. One day, when the house is empty except for the two of them, she grabs Joseph by his cloak and makes her demand again. Joseph's response is immediate and decisive. He flees, leaving his cloak in her hands. And this becomes the instrument of his downfall. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned, and Potiphar's wife spins a tale of attempted rape. When her husband returns, she shows him Joseph's cloak and tells her lies with the passion of wounded pride. "That Hebrew slave you brought us came to me to make sport of me," she claims. "But as soon as I screamed for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." Potiphar's anger burns hot, and Joseph finds himself torn from a position of trust and thrown into prison. From the heights of household management to the depths of an Egyptian dungeon, and all because he chose righteousness over compromise. But here's what's remarkable. Even in prison, the pattern repeats. The Lord is with Joseph. The warden takes notice of this Hebrew slave who somehow brings blessing wherever he goes. Before long, Joseph is put in charge of all the other prisoners, and whatever needs to be done in the prison, he's responsible for it. It's in this prison that Joseph's gift for interpreting dreams becomes widely known. Two of Pharaoh's officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, are imprisoned with him, and both have troubling dreams on the same night. When Joseph sees their distressed faces the next morning, he asks them what's wrong. They tell him about their dreams, lamenting that there's no one to interpret them. Do not interpretations belong to God? Joseph asks, "Tell me your dreams." The cupbearer speaks first. In his dream, he saw a vine with 3 branches that budded, blossomed, and produced grapes. He squeezed the grapes into Pharaoh's cup and placed it in Pharaoh's hand. Joseph's interpretation brings hope. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position, and you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer. But then Joseph makes a request, his voice heavy with longing. "But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve being put in a dungeon." The baker, encouraged by the favorable interpretation given to the cupbearer, shares his own dream. He carried 3 baskets of bread on his head, but birds were eating from the top basket. Joseph's interpretation is grim. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and impale your body on a pole, and the birds will eat away your flesh. 3 days later, on Pharaoh's birthday, both interpretations come to pass exactly as Joseph predicted. The cupbearer is restored to his position. The baker is executed. But in the joy of his restoration, the cupbearer forgets all about Joseph. For 2 full years, Joseph remains in prison, his hope of release seemingly forgotten by the one man who could have secured his freedom. 2 years. 730 days of waiting, wondering if God has forgotten him too. But God's timing is not our timing, and what seems like delay is often divine preparation. Joseph needed these years not just to suffer, but to mature, to develop the wisdom and character he would need for what lay ahead. And then, suddenly, everything changes. Pharaoh himself begins to have dreams, not just one, but two, both vivid and disturbing. In the first, he stands by the Nile River and sees 7 cows, fat and sleek, come up from the river to graze. Then 7 other cows, ugly and gaunt, come up from the river and devour the fat cows. But even after eating them, the ugly cows look just as gaunt as before. In the second dream, 7 heads of grain, healthy and good, grow on a single stalk. Then 7 other heads, thin and scorched by the east wind, sprout after them. And the thin heads swallow up the healthy heads. Pharaoh wakes troubled, his spirit agitated. He calls for all the magicians and wise men of Egypt, but none can interpret his dreams. And then, finally, the cupbearer remembers. "Today I am reminded of my shortcomings," he tells Pharaoh, and he recounts his experience in prison with the young Hebrew who could interpret dreams. Pharaoh immediately sends for Joseph. Picture this moment: guards rushing to the prison, Joseph being hastily cleaned up, his prison clothes replaced with fresh garments. After years of captivity, he's suddenly summoned before the most powerful man in the world. When Joseph stands before Pharaoh, the ruler wastes no time. "I had a dream, and no one can interpret it. But I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." Joseph's response reveals both his humility and his faith. "I cannot do it, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires." Even in this moment of opportunity, Joseph doesn't claim the gift as his own. He points to God as the source of all wisdom. Pharaoh recounts his dreams, and as he speaks, you can hear the anxiety in his voice. These aren't ordinary dreams. They feel prophetic, significant, urgent. When he finishes, Joseph doesn't hesitate. The interpretation comes to him with divine clarity. "The dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same," Joseph explains. "God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads of grain are 7 years. It is one and the same dream. The 7 lean, ugly cows that came up afterward are 7 years, and so are the 7 worthless heads of grain scorched by the east wind. They are 7 years of famine. 7 years of abundance, followed by 7 years of famine, unlike anything Egypt has ever experienced. The abundance will be so great that people will forget what want feels like. But the famine that follows will be so severe that it will consume all memory of the good years." But Joseph doesn't stop with interpretation. He has a plan. Now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take 1/5 of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. They should collect all the food of these good years that are coming and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the cities for food. This food should be held in reserve for the country, to be used during the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so that the country may not be ruined by the famine. The plan is brilliant in its simplicity and scope. Instead of merely predicting disaster, Joseph offers a solution. And Pharaoh recognizes not just the wisdom of the plan, but the wisdom of the man who conceived it. Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God? Pharaoh asks his officials. Then he turns to Joseph. "Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you." In a single moment, Joseph goes from prisoner to prime minister. Pharaoh places his signet ring on Joseph's finger, dresses him in robes of fine linen, puts a gold chain around his neck, and has him ride in a chariot as his second in command. At 30 years old, Joseph becomes the most powerful man in Egypt after Pharaoh himself. But this isn't just a rags to riches story. This is the unfolding of divine purpose. Everything Joseph has experienced, the dreams of his youth, the betrayal of his brothers, his time in Potiphar's house, his years in prison, all of it has been preparation for this moment. The boy who dreamed of sheaves bowing down to him is now in position to save not just Egypt, but the entire known world. Pharaoh gives Joseph an Egyptian name, Zaphenath-Paneah, which means revealer of secrets, and gives him an Egyptian wife, Asenath, daughter of the priest of On. Joseph embraces his new role with the same excellence that characterized his service in Potiphar's house and in prison. He travels throughout Egypt, organizing the collection and storage of grain during the 7 years of abundance. During these good years, Joseph has 2 sons. He names the first Manasseh, saying, "God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household." The second he names Ephraim, meaning, "God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering." These names tell the story of a man who has found peace with his past and purpose in his present. But the names also reveal something else. Joseph says God has made him forget his father's household. But has he really? Can a man truly forget the family that shaped him, even if they wounded him? The answer comes when the 7 years of abundance end and the famine begins. The famine is severe, just as Joseph predicted, and it spreads beyond Egypt to all the surrounding lands. But Egypt is prepared. While other nations face starvation, Egypt has grain stored in every city. People from all over the world come to Egypt to buy grain, and Joseph oversees all these transactions. Among those who come seeking food are 10 men from Canaan, Joseph's own brothers. Jacob has heard that there is grain in Egypt, and he sends his sons to buy some, keeping only Benjamin, Joseph's younger brother, at home for fear that harm might come to him. Picture this moment. Joseph, now 39 years old, dressed in Egyptian finery, speaking Egyptian, wielding absolute power over the grain that means the difference between life and death for millions. And before him stand 10 men, older now, weathered by years of hard living, their faces marked by the desperation that famine brings. They bow down to him, their faces to the ground, unknowingly fulfilling the dream he'd shared with them more than 20 years earlier. Joseph recognizes them immediately, but they don't recognize him. How could they? The 17-year-old boy they sold into slavery has become a powerful Egyptian official. His appearance has changed, his language has changed, his entire context has changed. But his memory hasn't. He remembers everything. And now Joseph faces a choice that will define not just his character, but the destiny of his entire family. He has absolute power over these men who destroyed his youth. He could reveal himself and exact revenge. He could have them thrown into prison, or worse. He could simply refuse to sell them grain and watch them return to Canaan to die of starvation. Instead, Joseph chooses a different path. He speaks harshly to them, accusing them of being spies. "You have come to see where our land is unprotected," he charges. But this isn't cruelty for cruelty's sake. Joseph is testing them, probing to see what kind of men they've become in the intervening years. The brothers protest their innocence. "We were 12 brothers, sons of one man," they explain. "One is no more, and the youngest is now with our father in Canaan. One is no more." They still believe Joseph is dead, still living with the lie they created all those years ago. Joseph puts them in custody for 3 days, then offers them a deal. One of them will remain in prison while the others return to Canaan with grain for their families. But they must bring back their youngest brother to prove they're telling the truth. As the brothers discuss this among themselves in Hebrew, not knowing that Joseph understands every word, they reveal the guilt that has haunted them for decades. "Surely we are being punished because of our brother," they say to one another. "We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life. But we would not listen. That's why this distress has come on us." Reuben, who had tried to save Joseph all those years ago, adds, "Didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy? But you wouldn't listen. Now we must give an accounting for his blood." Joseph has to turn away from them because he begins to weep. These are tears of many emotions, grief for the pain they all suffered, relief that his brothers' consciences aren't completely seared, perhaps even the beginning of hope that reconciliation might be possible. But he's not ready to reveal himself yet. He has Simeon bound before their eyes and taken away, then orders his servants to fill the brothers' sacks with grain and to secretly return each man's silver to his sack. The brothers load their donkeys and depart, but when they stop for the night and one of them opens his sack to feed his donkey, he finds his silver. "My silver has been returned," he tells the others. "Here it is in my sack." Their hearts sink and they turn to each other trembling. What is this that God has done to us? They ask. They recognize the hand of divine judgment in these strange events, and their guilty consciences magnify their fear. When they return to Jacob and tell him everything that happened, the old man is devastated. "You have deprived me of my children," he says. "Joseph is no more and Simeon is no more, and now you want to take Benjamin. Everything is against me." But as the famine continues and their grain runs out, Jacob has no choice. They must return to Egypt, and the Egyptian official has demanded to see Benjamin. Judah, who had suggested selling Joseph into slavery, now steps forward to guarantee Benjamin's safety. "I myself will guarantee his safety," he tells his father. "You can hold me personally responsible for him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him here before you, I will bear the blame before you all my life." When the brothers return to Egypt with Benjamin, Joseph sees his younger brother for the first time in over 20 years. Benjamin, who was just a child when Joseph was sold into slavery, is now a grown man with 10 sons of his own. Joseph is so deeply moved that he hurries out to his private room and weeps. He orders a feast prepared for his brothers, seating them according to their birth order, something that amazes them, since how could this Egyptian official possibly know their ages? Benjamin is served 5 times as much food as the others, another test to see if the old jealousies still burn in their hearts. But the brothers seem genuinely happy, eating and drinking freely with Joseph. The next morning, Joseph fills their sacks with food and again returns their silver. But in Benjamin's sack, he has his servants place his own silver cup. After the brothers leave the city, Joseph sends his steward after them with instructions to search their sacks and accuse them of stealing the cup. When the cup is found in Benjamin's sack, the brothers are devastated. They tear their clothes in grief and return to the city, throwing themselves down before Joseph. "What can we say to my lord?" Judah asks. "What can we say? How can we prove our innocence? God has uncovered your servant's guilt." But Joseph insists that only Benjamin will be punished. The rest are free to return to their father. This is the ultimate test. Will they abandon Benjamin as they once abandoned Joseph? Will they preserve their own lives at the cost of their brother's freedom? Judah's response reveals how much these men have changed. He steps forward and delivers one of the most moving speeches in all of Scripture, pleading for Benjamin's release. He recounts their father's love for this youngest son, how losing him would kill the old man. "Now then, please let your servant remain here as my lord's slave in place of the boy, and let the boy return with his brothers. How can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? No, do not let me see the misery that would come on my father." This is not the same Judah who coldly suggested selling Joseph into slavery. This is a man who has learned the value of sacrificial love, who is willing to give up his own freedom to spare his father grief and protect his brother. Joseph can contain himself no longer. He orders all his attendants to leave the room, and then, alone with his brothers, he reveals himself. "I am Joseph." He cries out, weeping so loudly that the Egyptians hear him. "Is my father still living?" The brothers are terrified, unable to answer him. How do you respond when the brother you thought was dead stands before you wielding the power of life and death? How do you face the one you betrayed when he holds your fate in his hands? But Joseph's next words are not of condemnation but of comfort. "Come close to me," he says. When they come near, he continues, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now, do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you." Listen to those words carefully. Joseph doesn't minimize what his brothers did. They sold him into slavery. But he sees a larger purpose at work. "God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then, it was not you who sent me here, but God." This is forgiveness at its most profound level. Joseph doesn't just pardon his brothers. He reframes their entire story. What they meant for evil, God meant for good. Their betrayal became the instrument of their salvation. Joseph embraces Benjamin and weeps, then kisses all his brothers and weeps over them. Only after this emotional reconciliation are they able to talk with him freely. The fear and guilt that have haunted them for decades begin to dissolve in the warmth of genuine forgiveness. When Pharaoh hears that Joseph's brothers have come, he's pleased and tells Joseph to bring his entire family to Egypt. "I will give you the best of the land of Egypt," he promises, "and you can enjoy the fat of the land." He provides carts for the journey and supplies for the trip, and Joseph sends his brothers away with gifts and provisions. When the brothers return to Canaan and tell Jacob that Joseph is still alive and is ruler of all Egypt, the old man's heart nearly stops. At first he doesn't believe them. It's too wonderful, too impossible. But when he sees the carts Joseph has sent and hears all they tell him, his spirit revives. "I'm convinced," he says, "my son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." And so begins the journey that will transform a family into a nation. Jacob, now called Israel, sets out for Egypt with all his descendants, 70 people in all. When they reach Beersheba, God speaks to Jacob in a vision, reassuring him that this move to Egypt is part of the divine plan. "Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt," God says, "for I will make you into a great nation there." The reunion between Joseph and his father is overwhelming in its emotion. Joseph prepares his chariot and goes to Goshen to meet Israel. When he appears before him, he throws his arms around his father and weeps for a long time. Israel says to Joseph, "Now I am ready to die, since I have seen for myself that you are still alive." Joseph settles his family in the land of Goshen, the best part of Egypt, where they can maintain their identity as shepherds and remain somewhat separate from Egyptian culture. He presents 5 of his brothers to Pharaoh, who is impressed by these relatives of his prime minister. The years pass, and the famine continues for the full 7 years Joseph predicted. Under his wise management, Egypt not only survives but prospers, accumulating vast wealth as people from all over the world come to buy grain. Joseph's policies during the famine transform Egypt's economy, consolidating land ownership under Pharaoh's control while preserving the lives of millions. But this isn't just an economic success story. It's the unfolding of a promise God made to Abraham centuries earlier that his descendants would be strangers in a foreign land, that they would be enslaved and mistreated, but that God would judge the nation that enslaved them and bring them out with great possessions. When Jacob is 147 years old and knows his death is approaching, he calls Joseph to his bedside and makes him swear to bury him not in Egypt, but in the cave where Abraham, Isaac, Sarah, and Rebekah are buried. "Do not bury me in Egypt," he pleads, "but when I rest with my fathers, carry me out of Egypt and bury me where they are buried." Before he dies, Jacob blesses Joseph's 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, adopting them as his own and giving them equal inheritance with his other sons. In a move that echoes his own younger over older story, Jacob crosses his hands and gives the greater blessing to Ephraim, the younger son, despite Joseph's attempts to correct him. Then Jacob calls all his sons together for his final blessing, and his words are prophetic, looking far into the future to see what will become of each tribal line. To Judah, he says, "The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nations shall be his." It's a messianic prophecy, pointing toward a future king who will come from Judah's line. When Jacob dies, the grief is profound. Joseph throws himself on his father's body and weeps over him and kisses him. The Egyptians mourn for Jacob 70 days, honoring him as they would honor Pharaoh himself. Joseph keeps his promise, taking his father's body back to Canaan and burying him in the cave of Machpelah, just as Jacob had requested. After the funeral, when they return to Egypt, Joseph's brothers are afraid again. With their father dead, will Joseph now take revenge on them? They send word to him, claiming that Jacob had instructed them to ask for forgiveness. But when they come to Joseph in person and throw themselves down before him, offering to be his slaves, his response reveals the depth of his transformation. "Don't be afraid," he tells them. "Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then, don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children." And he reassures them and speaks kindly to them. Joseph lives to be 110 years old, seeing his great-great-grandchildren mourn. When he knows his death is approaching, he gathers his brothers and makes them a promise that looks toward a future none of them will live to see. "I am about to die," he tells them, "but God will surely come to your aid and take you up out of this land, to the land he promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." Then he makes them swear an oath. "God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up from this place." Even in death, Joseph's faith looks forward to the fulfillment of God's promises. He believes that one day his people will return to the promised land, and when they do, he wants his bones to go with them. When Joseph dies, they embalm him and place him in a coffin in Egypt. But that coffin becomes a constant reminder to the Israelites of God's promise. Every day they see it, they remember Joseph's words, "God will surely come to your aid." For 400 years, through slavery and oppression, through the multiplication of their numbers and the hardening of Pharaoh's heart, that coffin stands as a testament to hope. And when Moses leads the Israelites out of Egypt in the great Exodus, he takes Joseph's bones with him, just as Joseph had requested. When they finally enter the promised land under Joshua's leadership, they bury Joseph's bones at Shechem, in the plot of ground that Jacob had bought from the sons of Hamor, the boy who had dreamed of ruling over his brothers, who had been sold into slavery in Egypt, finally comes home. What are we to make of this extraordinary story? On one level, it's a tale of human drama, jealousy, and betrayal, suffering and triumph, hatred transformed into love. But on a deeper level, it's a story about the mysterious ways of divine providence, about how God can weave even our worst moments into his perfect plan. Joseph's brothers meant their betrayal for evil, but God meant it for good. The famine that threatened to destroy Jacob's family became the means of their preservation. The slavery that should have crushed Joseph's spirit became the pathway to his elevation. The dreams that seemed to be nothing more than youthful arrogance turned out to be prophetic visions of God's purpose. This is not a story that trivializes suffering or suggests that everything happens for a reason in some simplistic way. Joseph's pain was real. His tears in that Egyptian prison were genuine. The years of wondering if God had forgotten him were filled with authentic anguish. The story doesn't minimize these experiences. It transforms them. What makes Joseph's story so compelling is not that he avoided suffering, but that he chose how to respond to it. At every crucial moment, he had a choice. When his brothers betrayed him, he could have become bitter. When Potiphar's wife tried to seduce him, he could have compromised. When he was forgotten in prison, he could have given up on God. When he had power over his brothers, he could have chosen revenge. But at each crossroads, Joseph chose faithfulness over bitterness, integrity over compromise, hope over despair, forgiveness over revenge. These weren't easy choices, they were costly ones. But they were the choices that allowed God to work through him to save not just his own family, but entire nations. The story of Joseph is also a story about waiting. 13 years passed between his enslavement and his elevation. 13 years of faithful service in circumstances he never chose, in a land far from home, speaking a language that wasn't his native tongue. We live in an age of instant gratification, where we expect quick results and immediate answers. Joseph's story reminds us that God's timeline is often longer than ours, but his purposes are always worth the wait. Consider the perfect timing of Joseph's rise to power. If he had been elevated earlier, he wouldn't have had the maturity to handle such responsibility. If it had happened later, he wouldn't have been in position to prepare for the famine. Every year of his preparation, even the painful ones, was necessary for the moment when the fate of nations would rest in his hands. The story also reveals something profound about the nature of forgiveness. When Joseph forgives his brothers, he doesn't pretend that what they did wasn't wrong. He doesn't minimize their guilt or excuse their actions. Instead, he places their actions within a larger framework of divine purpose. This is forgiveness at its most mature level, not the naive forgiveness that says, "It doesn't matter," but the profound forgiveness that says, "It mattered enormously, but God has used even this for good." And what about those dreams that started it all? The dreams that made his brothers hate him, that seemed like nothing more than the grandiose fantasies of a favored son? They came true, but not in the way anyone expected. Joseph's brothers did bow down to him, but by then, Joseph had learned that true greatness isn't about having others serve you, it's about serving others. His authority became the instrument of their salvation. The dreams were true, but they were also incomplete. They showed the outcome, but not the cost. They revealed the destination, but not the journey. God rarely shows us the full picture at the beginning, because if we could see all the suffering that lies between the promise and its fulfillment, we might not have the courage to begin. Joseph's story also speaks to the mystery of God's hiddenness. Throughout the entire narrative, God rarely speaks directly to Joseph. There are no burning bushes, no audible voices, no dramatic theophanies. Instead, God works through circumstances, through the interpretation of dreams, through the faithfulness of his servant in ordinary moments. Joseph's faith wasn't sustained by spectacular miracles, but by quiet confidence that God was present even when he seemed absent. This is perhaps the most relevant aspect of Joseph's story for us today. Most of us will never experience dramatic divine interventions. Our faith must be sustained not by miracles, but by the conviction that God is working through the ordinary events of our lives, weaving them into patterns we may not see until years later. The story reaches its climax not in Joseph's elevation to power, but in his reunion with his family. All the political success in the world couldn't heal the wound in his heart that came from being separated from those he loved. When he finally reveals himself to his brothers, when he embraces his father after decades of separation, we see that the greatest triumph isn't professional success, it's reconciliation. But even their reunion isn't the end of the story. The end comes with Joseph's death and his final request that his bones be carried out of Egypt when God delivers his people. In death, Joseph is still looking forward, still believing in promises he won't live to see fulfilled. His faith extends beyond his own lifetime to encompass God's ultimate purposes for his people. When Moses leads the Israelites out of Egypt 4 centuries later, he carries Joseph's bones with him. Those bones become a symbol of faith that endures beyond death, of promises that span generations, of a God who keeps his word even when centuries pass between the promise and its fulfillment. In the end, Joseph's story isn't just about one man's journey from slavery to freedom, from prison to palace. It's about how God shapes a people for his purposes, how he preserves his promises through the most unlikely circumstances, how he can take the worst intentions of human hearts and transform them into instruments of salvation. The boy who dreamed of sheaves bowing down became the man who fed the world. The victim of his brother's hatred became their savior. The slave became a ruler. The prisoner became a prime minister. The forgotten became unforgettable. Not because he was perfect, but because he remained faithful. Not because his path was easy, but because his trust in God was unshakable. Joseph's story echoes forward through history, pointing toward another beloved son who would be betrayed by his own people, sold for pieces of silver, condemned though innocent, and raised to the highest place of honor. Like Joseph, this son would save those who rejected him, offering forgiveness instead of condemnation, life instead of death. But that's another story for another day. Tonight, let Joseph's story live in your heart. Let it remind you that no betrayal is too deep for God to redeem, no suffering too great for him to use, no dream too broken for him to restore. Let it whisper to you in your darkest moments that God's purposes are often hidden but never absent, delayed but never defeated. The God who was with Joseph in the pit is with you in your struggles. The God who blessed Joseph in Potiphar's house will bless you in your service. The God who remembered Joseph in prison will remember you in your waiting. The God who elevated Joseph to save nations can use your life for purposes greater than you can imagine. For in the end, this isn't just Joseph's story. It's the story of everyone who dares to trust that God can write straight with crooked lines, who believes that what others meant for evil, God can mean for good, who holds fast to the conviction that no life surrendered to God's purposes is ever wasted. This is the story of Joseph, son of Jacob, father of Ephraim and Manasseh, interpreter of dreams, savior of nations, and testament to the truth that with God, no dream is too big, no pit too deep, and no betrayal too bitter to be transformed into blessing. May his story become part of your story, and may your story, like his, be woven into the great tapestry of God's eternal purposes, where every thread, no matter how dark, contributes to a pattern of beauty that will one day be revealed in all its glory. The dreamer is gone, but his dreams live on. The slave is free, but his service continues. The story ends, but its echoes reverberate through eternity, reminding us all that in God's hands, every ending becomes a beginning, every death becomes life, and every story of suffering becomes a symphony of hope.